councillors. Just after 9 o'clock, so I'd like to welcome you to the Environment and Community Committee meeting of the Toowoomba Regional Council. This meeting is open to the public and also be live streamed, so I'd like to thank those who are in the room with us today and acknowledge everyone watching via Council's social media channels. I'd like to acknowledge the Aboriginal parties whose songlines traverse these lands that we meet on today, the Western Waka Waka, Guyabal and Jarawar peoples, and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging, for they hold the knowledge, rich traditions and bold ambitions of Australia's first people. Item 2, Council, just attendance, including apologies, leave of absence. Now we do have a leave of absence that was granted at the previous ordinary meeting for Councillor Megan O'Hara Sullivan. Councillor Carol Taylor, I'm told, is late, but will be with us, so we can mark that as we go. Apart from that, there's no other apologies or anything else that would be to be noted. So Councillors, again, would like to acknowledge the acting CEO, the acting General Manager, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Councillors, the Portfolio Leader of Environment Community, Councillor Tim McMahon, the staff, and those in the general public that are with us today. Like also opportune time to acknowledge the values of TRC, of honesty, accountability, respect, teamwork, safety and well-being. And as I always start each of our Environment Community Committee meetings, we're saying, particularly honing in on that one around respect and obviously expecting open, honest debate, but obviously done in a respectful manner. So hard on topic and soft on people. So with that, we'll go to item 3, which is a request to sponsor the International Street Fest 2022. I might hand over to Kevin to introduce this one first of all.
Thank you, Chair. This item has been before you previously a number of times. It's been sponsored a number of times. It's an important event that's held. Unfortunately, it wasn't held last year because of a number of situations, including COVID. There was a request from Council to go back and work with the organisers around what that event looks like going forward. Particularly, they were looking last year at a 2-day event and asking for a lot larger sponsorship request. So that's now come back as a pared down event over a shorter period of time. And as I said, the team has worked with the organisers to develop that. But I'll hand over to Roberto or Gary and Roberto.
Hello, councillors. Excuse the mask. Judy's down with COVID. The 16 years the Multicultural Festival's been going in Toowoomba. It started off as a council initiative in 2006 and designed to celebrate the multicultural nature of the Toowoomba community. In 2015, the Multicultural Society took over that burden from council and has been running it ever since. They now have a total of 70 cultures actively participating in the event. And some of you may remember a couple of years ago when the focus was on the Scottish culture, which was a wonderful landmark year for the groups involved. COVID's impacted them, as Kevin mentioned, and like every other event, they're trying to reinvent themselves. They've reinvented themselves into the Street Fest, which has a pared down footprint in the park. So that means instead of the traditional 3 stages, you'll now see 1. Instead of a fenced venue, you'll see an unfenced venue. They'll be operating in a more condensed period of time, and all of this is advice that they've received from council to offer an event that's more attractive to tourists to town as well as our locals. They came to us seeking sponsorship of $33,000, which was assessed by the sponsorship assessment panel, and a recommendation of $25,000 of support was made. This recommended level of support is consistent to the budget allocation that exists in the budget, so it's money that actually exists and is available. Thank you.
Thanks to Gary, and also we've got Roberto Garcia with us here as well, and good opportunity to recognise Roberto for his efforts and of course in the initial stages of the Multicultural Advisory Committee. So thanks to Roberto. So councillors, are there any questions in this one? Councillor McMahon?
Oh, Chair, not so much a That's you. Not so much a question, comment. We've seen this before. Very big supporter of the Multicultural Festival. Love seeing it back in a new year, in a new format. I think it's important to remember we don't just pluck numbers of funding money out of thin air. It is done by a criteria. And I think we're at 33 last year. We had some COVID ramping on that. The officer's recommendation is 25, which is in line with the criteria present. I'm very happy with that. I know there might be some more questions, discussion, but I'd actually like to move the officer's recommendation, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McMahon. So we do have a mover of that, so I'll hold with that. So I do have a few other questions. We've got Councillor Shine.
Yeah, I just want to raise the attachments 4 and attachment 5, but I think they're confidential in nature. Attachment 4 is at least. So we want to discuss that. Do we have to go into confidential session?
In the absence of the CEO, I'd suggest we would. So you want to discuss?
Well, we can't do that straight away, so...
Yes, I was going to say, do you have any other questions in open? So what I'll propose is, if there's other questions, which there are, I can go to those and then we can come back and we can close the meeting and go into the confidential.
Attachment 5 is not, apparently. So just in relation to attachment 5, under economic benefit, Gary might be able to help us. It says that it's low economic benefit, bed, nights, tourists. But being an afternoon and nighttime activity, I was just wondering why there's obviously not a high emphasis placed on bed nights. You'd think that there would be, but it says low as opposed to good or average.
Yeah, this was a matter of quite a bit of debate within the assessment panel, but and primarily it's rated as low because we're quite brutal with regards to how many tourists do you attract to town that will actually rent a bed, and in this case not as many as similar sized events. And the main reason for that is being that the majority of people are within a day's travel or are from our own local community. That's one of the things that the organising committee is quite aware of, and so the rebranding, the reformatting and offering a more focused event is hoping to broaden that appeal so that people will come from further afield, which will kick in our bed nights to a higher level.
Thank you.
So thanks, Councillor Shine. So yeah, so we'll come back to we can go into confidential once we've had other questions. Councillor Summerfield.
Thank you, Chair, and I don't believe it's confidential. I just note that in the documentation I couldn't see where a bond was paid as part of the process. Could you elaborate on that for me, please?
Oh, the group itself undertakes the standard booking in Queen's Park with our Parks branch, and bonds are standard and part of their booking and have been for years.
Okay.
I'd have to actually contact my Parks colleagues to get the details, but I know that they do pay one.
So I notice it's omitted in the confidential document, so if we could get confirmation of that before next week, that would be appreciated. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Summerfield. Mayor Antonio.
Initially, I'd heard quite a bit from some of the organisers that they were in need of far more money than we'd been able to give them. Has there any discussion been had around that? The numbers that I heard initially were quite large numbers, and I told them to go back and have another think about it because I didn't think council could possibly afford the kind of things they were talking about.
Mayor, are you referring to as in this revised event or the previous event?
Previous event. And for it to continue into the future, the discussion that was in front of me was about significantly more money. So I'm happy to see the 25,000. I'm happy to see the model as it is, to be quite honest.
Yeah, to represent the desires of the organising committee, yes, they would like significantly more money. And some of the negotiations have been, well, what can you bear? What can you bear, or what is the level of support that we can offer, or how can you reduce your offering to reduce your costs so that the need for significantly more money is not there? I think if you ask them, they would say that they definitely like more money, but we're walking that tight line of trying to encourage financial independence and self-reliance on a group, and to, by the level of funding we give, encourage them to go out and get sponsorship from other providers within town, to get some government grants and to seek support from other multicultural organisations. So our money's there to stimulate that independence as well as support the event. But I would be misrepresenting the group if I didn't say that they would actually like more money, yes.
Can I just simply ask further, is any state government money flowing towards this organisation? Because, this particular event, is quite iconic in terms of celebrating multiculturalism in any community, in Australia, in fact. So I'm just wondering if the state government is putting money in.
At this stage, I don't think any state government funds have been finalised, but I know that they have got federal government funds in train, but they've yet to receive their letter that's a guaranteed support.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. Can I, so if I may ask a question of Councillor McDonald through the role with Southern Queensland Country Tourism, through our last meeting, there was an opportunity that was set up where they were able to meet with other funding bodies. Is that correct?
That's right, Councillor James. Through just to give a very quick update there. So meetings were held with Southern Queensland Country and Tourism Events Queensland around this item, and obviously this is where this reduced event has come back to. Tourism Events Queensland will only fund events after they've been running. So, in other words, this would be a new event for them to kick off with, and I think then it would probably attract some level of funding. But I know Southern Queensland Country have worked with the event organisers to get to this point, to almost reset the event, if you like, and how it'll go. It's called a Street Fest, yet still in the park. So that may be a little bit of confusion, but I do think it's probably on the right track to reset and see what it might be. So this might be the start of a renewal of an event of some sort, I would imagine.
Thanks, Councillor McDonald. So just sort of to add further context to that question, Mayor, if there aren't any further questions in open, sorry, Mayor Antonio? Okay, so I do have a question that I do need to go into confidential. Before I do that, does anyone else have any questions in regards to this? We do have a mover and a seconder for the officer's recommendation. Are there any further questions? Okay, no, so I'll need a motion to go into confidential, moved by Councillor Bonhoff, seconded by Councillor McMahon. All those in favour? All right, so, councillors, we do have a recommendation. It is that council approves sponsorship to the Toowoomba International Multicultural Society Incorporated in the amount of $25,000 for the conduct of the International Street Fest 2022. So I had Councillor McMahon moved. Apologies, I did have a second. Was it Mayor? Seconded by Mayor Antonio. Does anyone wish to go into debate? So I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? It's carried. Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Roberto. So we now move to an adjournment. We have one other item in Environment Community, which is in confidential, so it'll be at the
Mr.
resumption
Chair.
of... Sorry?
Mr. Chair, just before you adjourn the meeting, I considered this again last night. I know I've made a declaration in the past. I keep declaring that nothing's changed. It's in relation... Oh, no, sorry. Wrong one. Completely wrong one. I thought it was Highfields. It's Kabbalah.
Jumping the gun. You'll get your opportunity, I assure you.
Righto.
Now we'll move to adjourn? Yeah, move to adjourn. Moved by Councillor McDonald, seconded by Councillor Melissa Taylor. All those in favour? Carried. I'll hand over to Finance and Business Strategy.
Well, good morning, councillors. Welcome to Finance and Business Strategy for July. A very warm welcome to everyone, Mayor and councillors and those in the gallery. Welcome to Lawson, who's in his second day here today. Welcome to you, Lawson. Happy to have you here. And I hope you've enjoyed your time here as a work experience person. We look forward to the report that you'll give back to your school coming through as a duplicate copy. I also acknowledge those who are watching online today and appreciate your interest in what we're doing as council. Can I acknowledge in item number 1 the Aboriginal parties whose songlines traverse these lands we meet on today, the Western Waka Waka, Guyabal and Jarrawa peoples, and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging, for they hold the rich traditions, bold ambitions of Australia's first people. Acknowledge Councillor Shine as the Portfolio Lead for Finance and Business Strategy, and Councillor Shine will be up here chairing later on in item number 4, which leads me to item 2, which is the attendance and apologies, leave of absence and declarations of conflicts of interest. The apology that we have was already recorded as a leave of absence from Councillor O'Hara Sullivan, and be it a committee meeting, there's no need to record any other potential leaves of absence for special or ordinary meetings later on. Now, there are a couple of declarations, councillors, but if there are any other conflicts that crop up through the meeting, please feel free, whether it's yourself or you feel others have, to raise that at that time, and we'll deal with it then. Declarations from myself and Councillor O'Shea refer to item number 4. Pardon me. Councillor O'Shea, I'll read mine first and then go on to yours. This is for item number 4, quote or tender consideration plan for the Customer Communications and Engagement Branch for Advertising Services, a declaration of prescribed conflict of interest. I inform the meeting that I have a prescribed conflict of interest in this matter, as defined in section 150EI of the Local Government Act, 2009. The nature of my interest is as follows. A, I am part owner of property located at 435 Ruthven Street, Toowoomba, Cracker Print and Paper, Pty Ltd. B, Cracker Print and Paper Pty Ltd is a supplier to council and listed in the involved parties for the quote or tender consideration plan for the Customer Communications and Engagement Branch for Advertising Services, and in accordance with Section 150 EM of the Local Government Act 2009, I will leave the meeting and stay away from the meeting while this matter is discussed and voted on. That's when we get to item number 4. Councillor O'Shea.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Also for item number 4, I inform this meeting that I have a declarable conflict of interest in this matter as defined in Section 150 EN of the Local Government Act 2009. This declarable conflict of interest arises because I potentially stand to gain a benefit or suffer a loss depending on the outcome of Council's consideration of this matter. And B, I potentially stand to gain a benefit or a loss because one of the radio stations mentioned in the quote or tender consideration plan for the Customer Communications and Engagement Branch for Advertising Services is Power FM, and I am employed by it as on a subcontractor basis. I propose to leave and stay away from the place where the meeting is being held while this matter is discussed and voted on.
Thank you, Councillor O'Shea. Any other conflicts that are wanting to declare? As I say, if there is something that crops up, please feel free to indicate when we get to that item. Item number 3 then, councillors, is 2.58 Community Engagement Policy. We have the Principal Stakeholder Engagement, Trevor Mitchell, here to answer any questions, but I'll hand over to you, General Manager, and welcome General Manager Anne-Marie and CEO Nick, Acting CEO. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, councillors. So this report seeks Council's approval of the proposed changes to the Community Engagement Policy. Page 2 of the report provides details of the extensive consultation that has taken place around these amendments, and Trevor's here to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks very much, General Manager Anne-Marie. We've had a couple of goes at this actually. Did come to council and was deferred till we had a session. We've done that. Trevor, would you like to make any comments to the report before I go to questions?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, councillors. Probably just in summary to say I've taken on board feedback from the initial report and the workshop, and a lot of the points of concern that were raised, the wording has been reinstated in the policy.
Thank you, Trevor, very much indeed. Councillors, there is a motion before us that the attached and revised Council Policy 2.58, Community Engagement Attachment 1, be adopted. Endorsed changes will be reflected in the policies accompanying Community Engagement Guidelines and Toolkit. Do I have anyone who would like to move that recommendation? Oh, sorry. Question. Sorry, Councillor Nancy. You're right.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions, actually.
Okay.
So just on page 3 of 8 of the document, dot point 3, which says close the loop, and I think it's really good that that's been put in there, but it gave me questions, which was, how will that actually be implemented? Will closing the loop be included in the budget costs when a business case is developed and comes to council, and we talk about we're going out to the community for consultation? Will closing the loop be included in that? And also, when we do make amendments to policies like this, do we actually do staff training around that so that people understand all of the amendments that are made in a policy, so that it's not just another piece of paper that's put on the shelf or in a file and not seen again until it's reviewed in a year's time? So I just wonder if you could respond to those first, please.
Through you, Chair. So in terms of closing the loop, that's sort of an integral part of our project management framework approach to stakeholder engagement. So it will essentially be on a project-by-project basis, and that'll determine, the nature of the project will determine how we close the loop. But in practice, it'll be going back out to all the stakeholders who've responded to let them know how their feedback has informed the project and where their feedback has been able to be incorporated, and when it hasn't, to be able to explain to them why it can't be included in the project. So that's essentially how it'll happen in practice. I think on a project-by-project basis, I think would be the main approach to it.
Thanks, Trevor. And I understand you're thinking along the lines of for projects, but this actually reflects across all business areas of council, including if waste, for example, was to do another waste survey, the outcomes of a waste survey, if staff survey is done. So there's all sorts of consultation that we do, and this would have to cover off on everything, not just on projects. So I'm just wondering whether we're allowing for that and to make sure that the staff training around it as well.
Yes, my view is that closing the loop approach should apply right across council to whatever the nature of the consultation activities should be. And in terms of training, I think the best thing we can do is certainly raise awareness with the groups who've provided initial input into the policy review. But then we'll have it featured up on the intranet to explain what the changes are and to raise awareness across council that way.
And hope they read it.
I hope they read it.
That's certainly an interesting way of doing it. On page 5 of 8, the IAP2 public participation spectrum is still there, and I don't believe I was present for the workshop. I think I was away at a forum. So it continues to concern me that we have that empower column in there because we can't deliver on it. So we shouldn't have anything in a policy that we can't deliver on. We cannot put our hand on our heart and say that we're going to place final decision making in the hands of the public. We've been elected to make the decisions around this table, and the public are incapable of making the decision. You can say that we, for example, you go out and you do public consultation and you get 1,500 responses out of our 170,000 residents, and we're going to make a decision based on that? Or are we going to make a decision based on the 170,000 people in our region? It's those words, it's just not physically capable of doing. And I'm just not comfortable still with that table still being in there. And it really, to me, highlights the fact that we need to make sure we do our community consultation really well. You know, you'll recall there's been previous times when we've had results of community consultation come back to us and we'll say, the downhill mountain biking is a classic example of why you cannot or you have to make sure that you get broad community feedback and not allow it to be biased by one group. So how do we do that? And I don't believe that this table should remain in this policy because it's just not possible to deliver what's in it as a council, any council, not just us, any council. You cannot place the final decision making in the hands of the public. It's not physically possible to do that, and that's what we're elected to do.
Through you, Chair.
Trevor, touch on it because we did speak about this at the session prior as well in regard to the full spectrum of IAP2. Yep. But happy for you to.
Thank you, Chair. I'd probably just make the observation that the spectrum is an internationally accepted framework, but there's no compulsion to use every or any of the elements of it. It's the basis of our approach to engagement, but we're not mandated or forced to use the full spectrum. So the wording I've put in there is that we recognise that's the internationally accepted spectrum, but in reality, council are the final decision makers. And there may be some aspects of particular projects subject to council decision where the community can make a final decision on some aspect of it. But we certainly in practice recognise that that won't be the case. But because it is the foundational framework for our approach, I feel like the whole spectrum should be in there to let the community know that this is the framework that we're using on, that we're based on, even though in practice we might not get to the end of this spectrum.
Does the policy actually reflect that in all the wording though?
I think so. There's I've put a line in there to say that make it clear that the councillors are the final decision makers on projects, and it would only be like an aspect of a project subject to council decision where the community may be able to make a final decision on an aspect of a project.
Okay. So a follow-up, if I could, Mr Chair. So in relation to that, if we're going to have that in there, I come back to what I was saying before on the importance of ensuring we get a broad cross-section of our community when we're seeking community feedback. What is being put in place by the organisation to ensure that we do get that broad community feedback and not have biased reporting, which can quite easily occur? And we've talked about it over the years, many examples across our region, how it can easily be biased by one group or another. If you even talk about small towns where it can be, and I won't name names, but I'm sure you know which one I mean. So I just wonder what's being put in place to ensure we get an unbiased feedback.
Through your chair, our approach, I think the subject of the data analysis was raised at the workshop, and one of the things that we're definitely taking on board is to be more rigorous in our analysis and to put in place steps using local contexts, our community development offices and other networks to get a better sense of what the actual community sentiment is and identify where groups might be have a potential to sway or bias to the outcome. So, and to actually report that as part of the consultation findings so that councillors have a more accurate representation. You know, if we have 1,500 responses, but we might be able to say, well, actually, there's a small group of 10 people and they put 5 responses or 100 responses in each, so that we have a better breakdown of the data to more accurately reflect what the actual sentiment is. So we'll be taking a more rigorous approach to the data analysis, and also initially before that, actually identifying the stakeholders and the stakeholders, you know, their own sort of, you know, potential conflicts of interest in how they may respond.
Oh, thanks for that, Trevor. So I just wondered then, in relation to different groups in the community, and I think from a perspective of, say, older people who can't access a computer, or younger people who have absolutely no interest in going onto Your Say or any of council's mediums, how on earth do we attract them? We find it hard enough as councillors to try and engage with the various groups across the whole age diversity, and I just wonder what things are being put in place to ensure that, because that also helps in having that diversity about how people can provide feedback. That also helps avoid that one group responding.
Through you, Chair. We'll be making a much more concerted effort to target those harder to reach groups. So in the case of the seniors, we'll be looking at targeting seniors clubs, the U3A organisation and service clubs to be able to get the message out for whatever the particular consultation is, and working with the community development officers in the youth council to target youth, and looking at youth clubs and activities where they take place to be able to go to where they are to try and seek feedback that way. It's actually you know, more concerted concentration on those particular groups.
Thanks, Trevor. Appreciate that.
Councillor Antonio, the Mayor, and then Councillor Carroll.
Well, I'm seeing it slightly different to what Councillor Summerfield has seen it in terms of community involvement and so forth, and the community making decisions. We are the community. Each and every one of us sit around this room. You've only got to walk the streets of a town or walk the streets of Toowoomba and you'll get some advice from somebody. And it's up to us to balance that advice. It's up to us to do the work that you and your team do, Trevor, to actually go out and consult. I'm quite comfortable with the way things are going, and I think that, you know, there's many different groups out there, all of whom get a say, but there comes a day when we hear in this room, as a result of what we hear in the community, have to make a judgment, and that judgment's made on our involvement in the community. So I think the community's fairly heavily involved, because there's 11 of us here, and we do get about a bit, and we do talk to people, and we do pick up what they want done. And our job is to balance that budget and do all those other things that have to be done. So I'm fairly comfortable with where we are, and I don't entirely agree with Councillor Summerfield, although I take a point.
Take that as a comment, Mayor. Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Mr Chair. And thank you, Trevor, for the report. I just do worry, some of my comments have been picked up. For instance, RPEQ signed off engineering things cannot be made to a popular. The community obviously doesn't understand that. I guess my other comment is, as I made about our grants, that there are sections of our community who are very, very good at contacting councillors and going online and using the aids that we have there, and there are others that aren't. So I guess I see on here that on the next page from that table is where it says it does seem to be inclusive. My concern is if we have a really big project that's in a community that we actually do go out and physically on the ground in a public hall or somewhere else consult with the community, because I'm very in touch with many areas of our community and a lot of them are not IT savvy, they're not. And their opinions, and they stand back and wait until things become really quite, well, maybe quite serious and that they've been left behind. So I think that we have to recognise that in our community that there are some that are very savvy in how to contact councillors and very savvy in how to use IT for those reasons, but there are others who don't and sit. And we can't, you've got it covered there, but my concern only is, and I think I'm right in saying that we can and we will, if there's a major project out there that has major impacts on one of our smaller communities or whatever, that we will have a shop front, so to speak, so that people can come. And it is covered in that next page over there. So I think I'm quite comfortable with it. I think the changes are really very inclusive, I think. But back to that table, I mean, that's I guess that you've reassured me by your words that, you know, say if we've got an engineering bridge or something, you can't have the public design that. And because it has to be done in that particular way. And there'll be other instances of that in other portfolios as well. So I do agree that we are the decision makers, but we need to be even-handed in that as well, because we need to recognise we're going to have very noisy people, and we're going to have people who sit and wait with something like this, and for us to go to them, which doesn't always happen, but that's the makeup of our community. And it's not going to change overnight. So thank you. I think it's a far better policy now. Thank you.
No, take that as a comment. Thanks, Councillor Carroll. Councillor Kerry?
No, thanks. Just taking on what Councillor Taylor has just said, it's not just engineering matters, that was by way of example, but financial as well, because we may not be able to afford what the community or the interests in the community might want. I just on further examination of this, and sort of brought it up at the workshop, Trevor, I apologise for that, but it's not true, is it, to under empower in that table, to place final decision-making in the hands of the public, and we will implement what you decide. That's not what happens. You know, under the law, we have to make the decision here, and yeah, the public get the final say as to what happens to us at the election. That it's a representative democracy. But so how do we make allowance for that, or how do we fit that into the reality of the situation?
Through you, Chair. So our practical approach is to view the spectrum as a range of community engagement consultation tools that we can use, but don't have to use all of them. We, you know, depending on the nature of the project, we'll decide what fits best. But when it comes to the empower thing, it would take in practical terms, a council decision to say, here's a particular project where we'd like the community to make a decision about it, or in a practical example, it might be, here's say $50,000 for a park. Why don't we ask the community how they want it spent? It would be that nature of thing, and that would be subject to a council decision to actually make that happen, not the other way around where the community calls for it to happen.
I just, you know, for example, this week we had to deal with issues arising out of roads, and where we were consulted by members of the community, but we're just unlikely to ever been able to accede to all of their requests. So it's the final decision making is not in the hands of those members of the public, at least, anyway.
Thanks, Councillor Shine. I think, Trevor, you've answered that a couple of times now pretty well. Councillor Bill and Councillor Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm just listening to the questions in the around the room regarding the IAP2 table. Just a comment, respectfully, Chair, if I may. This is we often hear a lot of requests for benchmarking and best practice frameworks, and as Trevor, the officer, has suggested, that's exactly what this is, and all it is. And council, at its discretion, and obviously taking advice from officers, will have an entry point and an exit point from this table. And it allows a degree of flexibility because one size doesn't fit all. And yes, there will probably never be in local government land that decision-making totally handed over to the community. It's more about a position of partnering with the community. I've used this term before, we're very good at consulting, but by that I mean sometimes we have a view of where we want to go and we go out and ask the question and call that consulting. Partnering's then again very different. So I still remember these questions in a one-day workshop that LGAQ facilitates for councillors to actually do. And they were unpacked in a 5-day facilitators course that I did many years ago, even further. But some of the practical tools and being able to understand at any point on that table what tool is being utilised or level of engagement or dialogue with the community is being utilised is extremely important, I feel, from a councillor's point of view, to be able to be across that. I just really think there is an opportunity here for this boardroom and management, if they wish, to actually avail themselves of an LGAQ led and facilitated course, which they have been doing for years. It is only a framework. We, I think, do very well by benchmarking against world's best practice stuff. There are other world's best practice frameworks, but there will be also components of that. And this IAP2 framework is not just applicable for local government, it's used in many, many, many different sectors. So we pick what we want. Yeah, I give a couple of examples of where it was really well utilised in my view. And a couple of terms ago, when we did the largest planning exercise for West Toowoomba, the largest in the state it was, we were told by the state at the time. For all of that engagement, we had some feedback and some of it wasn't good, and we unpacked that, but for the percentage that was negative, it was minuscule because we utilised a framework. The other one that we got right, in my view, was the Highfields town centre, and that will utilise this framework. And for the sensitivities around that initially, I think we did pretty well, and we utilised this framework. So that's how I see it practically working. Anyway, thanks, Councillor.
No, thanks, Councillor Bill. Good information. Councillor Tim.
Chair, thanks. Look, with community consultation, I often find that you put it out on a dog park and you're only going to get the dog owners or those who really hate barking. A pool, you're going to get the lap swimmers club. And I think that's got to come back. I really like the point that you've added in here, that feedback and data received during consultation will be analysed to provide council with an accurate assessment to aid in decision making. So it kind of contradicts that table, well, the far ends of that table, that the information is just aiding in our decision making. And I think I applaud the inclusion of that because it's as it should be. I also really like the point above it that we're out into the hard to reach parts of society, and the average family living in the suburbs that doesn't fill out the forms, I think, really has a lot to say and don't often fill out the consultation forms. And I really welcome and I know they're hard to get, hard to reach, but their feedback is equally as valuable. You know, they still have the same voice as anyone. So I welcome the work done to engage in those groups. I suppose my question is the top of page 5, just about engagement will also be influenced by awareness of other projects and current consultations being delivered regionally. And I know it's just awareness, but I just wondered if you could answer to what extent, like if people in North Toowoomba say they don't want to slide in their park, does that mean we take that as awareness that slides are moving out? Or can you just explain how that works in practice?
Thank you, through you, Chair. The intent of that point is to make the project teams and the stakeholder engagement officers aware of other activities that are happening across council. So the practical example would be, say, if we were to go to Oakey to consult on a particular project, and then we become aware that community development is doing some consultation there, maybe the week after, and economic development is doing some activity there as well. Rather than going out 3 weekends in a row and people get consultation fatigue, we'll be looking to amalgamate it and just have a one-stop shop where possible to do consultation that maybe touches on several elements, but we're not keep going back every week or two to hammer people to get them to provide feedback. So that's more the sense of what that point is.
Oh, no, that's good. Yeah, I welcome that as well. I think the fatigue's interesting. Last question, things like the Toowoomba Community Notice Board on Facebook. If you want to know the issues that they've got with council, have a look there. Do we use that in our consultation, like when they're coming to us and putting in this big world? This week, prime example about the roads and the frustration on there. Are those kind of strategies used?
We, through your chair, we do keep a close eye on social media where we can, and we always almost treat it as media monitoring, so that we collect the relevant media clips every day, but we look at social media as well to highlight, particularly for the project managers, what community sentiment might be. Sort of being displayed and commented on social media, but that might not get to media for a week or two later. So yeah, we do that where we can.
Thanks, saves us pathwaying it. Thanks very much.
Very good. Any other questions, comments for Trevor? But there are no further questions or comments. The recommendation is before you, councillors, that the attached and revised Council Policy 2.58 Community Engagement Attachment 1 be adopted. Endorsed changes will be reflected in the policies accompanying Community Engagement Guidelines and Toolkit. Do I have a mover for that motion? Moved by Councillor Carl, seconded by Councillor Antonio. Those in favour? That motion is carried. Councillors, we move to item number 4, and there's 2 declarations, so I'll hand over the chair to Councillor Shine to conduct item number 4, and we'll leave the room. Councillor O'Shea.
Good morning, councillors. I just repeat and rely on the introduction of Councillor McDonald before in relation to item 3, and that can make do for item 4. As you know, the item is to deal with the tender consideration plan for customer communications and engagement branch for advertising services. It was to be presented by Natalie, but I think Anne-Marie, the General Manager, is to take on that task now. I'll pass on to Anne-Marie.
Morning again, councillors. So the quota tender consideration plan for the customer communication and engagement branch for advertising services provides the information required to comply with the regulation and justifies the use of the quote or tender consideration plan as an effective and appropriate alternative to the open tender process. So, councillors, we have done a number of these recently. The traditional quote or tender process is not efficient in some of these circumstances because we don't have the ability to request a quote from 3 suppliers and then select one when we're going through those. So happy, Daniel is here to answer any questions you may have, but I'm happy to take questions.
Any questions? Councillor Summerfield moves the recommendation. The recommendation is that Council adopt the quote or tender consideration plan, customer communication engagement for advertising services, and 2, that Council note the plan will be internally reviewed on an annual basis and only represented to Council where there are proposed changes as a result of the review or otherwise. Over seconded to that, Councillor Von Hoff. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Yeah. Well, yeah. Bill. That's all right.
Thank you, Councillor Sean. Councillors, we move to adjourn the Finance and Business Strategy, moved by Councillor O'Shea. Have we got a seconder to adjourn, moved by Councillor Von Hoff. Those in favour? That motion is carried, and we'll hand over now to Economic Development. To you, Mayor.
I'll declare the meeting open, the meeting of the Economic Development Committee for this day, the 13th of July, and in doing so, can I acknowledge the Aboriginal parties whose songlines traverse these lands we meet on today, the Western Waka Waka, the Guyabul, Jarrawa and the Bigambul peoples, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, for they hold the knowledge, the rich traditions and the bold ambitions of Australia's first people. Note the absence today of Councillor O'Hara Sullivan, and ladies and gentlemen, we will in a moment be moving into confidential, but before we do so, can I take this opportunity of welcoming David Wing from JLL and Tim Brown from JLL, and thank you very much for being here. Also recognise Lawson Troy here again today, and thank you very much for bringing him, Councillor McMahon. I think it's great that young people take the opportunity of seeing what in fact happens in the council chambers. So welcome, Lawson. Councillors, this is a confidential matter. Would somebody like to move that we move into confidential, please? Councillor Carl, you have something to say?
Yeah, Mr Chair, just before we do, I'd just like to declare to Council, as I've declared in the past, I live in proximity to the land in question in Highfields, and nothing has changed as before. I'll just make that declaration. I'm in Councillors' hands what they think, or if the status quo remains, I'm happy to be involved in the discussion when we move into confidential.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Councillor Carl? My view is the circumstances have not changed. Councillor Carroll?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I was just going to move, or attempt to move, if I may, that I don't believe Councillor Carl has any more to gain or lose than anyone else sitting around this table, as it is the whole of Highfields and whole of that area consideration that we're looking at.
Is that necessary, Mr CEO, having the fact that we've been through this a number of times before?
No, given that it's been brought forward before and voted on before, there's no need to vote on it again, given the circumstances haven't changed.
Thanks very much, Councillor Carroll. Any other comments around the room? If not, would someone like to move that we move into confidential, please? Councillor Carroll has moved. Councillor Tim McMahon has seconded. Those in favour? I assumed that it'd be okay. Righto, open session, we're there now. There's a recommendation before you in 3 parts. The questions that have been asked in respect to that recommendation, I think, have been answered in confidential. Do we have a mover for the recommendation? Councillor Carol Taylor has moved that. Councillor Tim McMahon has seconded that. Any comments? Those in favour? Those against? Want your vote recorded, Councillor Nancy? Those in favour? That's those in favour again? That's carried. Well, with that, councillors, we'll declare the meeting closed, and I'll hand back to Councillor O'Shea. Well done.
Well, thanks, councillors. We'll resume the Environment and Community Committee meeting. Just before we do go into confidential, I might just hand over to Acting General Manager Kevin Jeffries. There was a question around the bond with that park and that international, in terms of the bond. So, and Kevin can elaborate.
Through the Chair, yes, I can confirm with councillors that a bond is taken for Queen's Park as part of our fees and schedule. Last year, although the event didn't go ahead, the park booking had a $3,200 bond attached to it, and it would be reconsidered this year on the size of the event going forward and the area they are taking, but yes, it will be.
Thanks, Kevin. So councillors, to go into our next item, which is a confidential, so we'll ask for a motion to go into closed session. By Councillor Vonhoff, seconded by Councillor Carol Taylor. All those in favour? It's carried. Right. Councillors, so the recommendation is there before you. So in regards to this item, the sale of surplus property at Kabala, moved by Councillor McMahon, seconded by Councillor Vonhoff. All those in favour? That's carried. So councillors, that concludes Environment Community Committee meeting. I'll hand over now to Finance and Business Strategy. Thanks, councillors.
Thanks very much, Councillor O'Shea. We'll resume the finance and business strategy and ask for a motion to close the meeting. Moved by Councillor Shine, seconded by Councillor McMahon. Those in favour? Motion is carried. Thanks, Brendan. So item number 6, councillors. Councillor Shine, you have a recommendation?
Yes, I move that the matter be referred to next week's ordinary meeting.
So deferred to next Tuesday's ordinary meeting for a decision. Recommendations there before you, councillors, that this matter be deferred for consideration at the ordinary meeting of council 19th of July 2022. Seconded by Councillor Rebecca. Anyone want to speak differently to that? Those in favour? That motion's carried. That concludes the Finance and Business Strategy. Thank you, Acting CEO. Thank you, General Manager Anne-Marie. Thanks, councillors. In fact, that concludes the committee meetings for today. So thank you. Thanks for all of those thousands watching online. Appreciate it.